Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than right here on the DSR Network. And there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than by becoming a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 40% off discount on sign-up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. President Donald Trump is growing angrier and angrier over polls that keep showing him tanking. On Monday, he erupted on Truth Social, raging that polls sponsored by media organizations are compromised and corrupt. Then he went even further, quoting one of his own pollsters, saying that 2 major new surveys are fake polls. All this raises a deeper question. To what degree are the people around Trump simply lying to him about how things are going right now? It's becoming clear that they're lying to him about the state of public opinion and even lying to him about the legality of his own policies. Today we're talking about all this with journalist and author Michael Cohen, who has a new piece up on his Substack, Truth and Consequences, suggesting that it really does look as if Trump's aides are keeping him in a state of delusion right now. Michael, thanks for coming on.
Greg, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Trump is particularly upset over new polls from the New York Times and the Washington Post. The Times has Trump's approval rating at 42%, and the New Post poll has it at 39%. Trump erupted on Truth Social and said the greatly respected pollster John McLaughlin has said that these are, quote, fake polls from fake news organizations. Trump called these organizations sick and the enemy of the people. Didn't mention that John McLaughlin's firm does polling for one Donald J. Trump. Yeah. Michael, here Trump is citing his own pollster to claim that polls by news organizations have been deliberately faked.
It's pretty hard, I think, for Trump to argue that the polls are rigged against him when pretty much every single poll shows him doing poorly. I mean, this is not like just 2 bad polls for Trump. This has been a trend line we've seen now, I mean, basically since February or March. And so I think it's kind of I'm not surprised by it. This is the way Trump sort of lashes out at people and lashes out at bad news against him. But I think it's pretty obvious that his numbers are bad. One thing that I am struck by, and it occurs to me that it's very possible that he simply wasn't aware of how bad his polls are, or how bad his polls are doing. It wouldn't shock me if it's being kept away from him by his own aides. And so perhaps there was just no way to avoid it this weekend, because these obviously got a great deal of attention in major newspapers, ones that I assume he maybe glances at or maybe has some understanding of what they're saying about him. So it's possible that this is the first he's aware of just how poorly he is polling.
It's worth noting that Trump is actually raging at Fox News as well. He had a bad poll from Fox the other day, and Trump tweeted, "Rupert Murdoch has told me for years that he's going to get rid of his Fox News Trump-hating fake pollster, but has never done so." And so it's not as if he's he's completely insulated from the realities of public opinion. Even Fox News is talking about him starting to slide in the polls in their own polling. And his response to even that is to rage and call it fake and rigged and all the rest of it. I mean, what do you make of that part of it? If he's angry at Rupert Murdoch for supposedly trying to hurt him with the wrong kind of polling or a fake pollster, then it's starting to sound pretty desperate, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. But I think it's also sort of interesting that, up until this point, Trump and the White House seemed oddly indifferent to their lousy public opinion numbers. Something I've been really struck by in this second time around with Trump is that he's pursuing policies that are not very popular, and doesn't seem that bothered by them being popular. Like, he didn't back off on any of the tariff and trade policies because public opinion was opposed to it. I mean, as far as we know, it seemed like he backed off of it because, he feared possibly sparking a depression, or he feared the effect of the bond markets, who seem to have more power these days than the polls do, at least at the White House. So, I'm a little taken aback by it, and I can only assume that maybe he wasn't fully aware of just how poorly he's been doing, because up to this point, this White House has shown a sort of a stunning indifference to how, popular their policies are or are not.
I just want to bear down on one more aspect of this whole thing. It's important to note that both the Times and the Post poll find very broad disapproval of Trump's abuses of power in particular.
Yeah.
The Post poll finds majorities think Trump has exceeded his authority and disapprove of his lawless abuses of power on immigration in particular. The Times poll similarly found majorities say Trump has exceeded his powers and disapprove of his handling of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was illegally sent to a prison in El Salvador. So if you step back, what you really have here is Trump's pollster deceiving him about the true nature of public opinion when it comes to his lawless overreach. I think it's very likely that his advisors are telling him that the public is fully behind the lawlessness, at least some of his advisors, the ones like Stephen Miller who really want full-blown fascism to emerge here. What do you think?
It's not clear to me that he understands even that he's breaking the law on the Abrego Garcia case. And I mean that there was an interview he did with Oscar Time magazine, sort of the 100-day, benchmark, and they interviewed him and they asked him about this case. And he, they said, the Supreme Court ruled that you have to bring, Kilmar Abrego Garcia back. Aren't you disobeying the Supreme Court? And he said, that's not what my people told me. They say that this 9-0 decision was something very different and actually was something in my favor. And then he goes to great lengths in this interview to say on more than one occasion that he always thinks he should abide by and comply with Supreme Court decisions. In fact, he says it, I think 2 or 3 times, says he abides by lower court rulings. And I actually have to say, give the man his due on this one. By and large, his administration has adhered to the court orders, many of which have gone against them since January 20th. I mean, they've adhered to them on issues like transgender troops in the military. They've adhered on issues like birthright citizenship. I mean, when they've been told to do things, they generally have done it, but not on this case. And I strongly suspect that what's happening here is he simply doesn't know that the Supreme Court told him to facilitate the return of Garcia.
Well, there's something else I want to bring up in the Time magazine interview because it supports what you're saying here. Trump was asked if he has requested of El Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele to return Abrego Garcia. And Trump said, no, I haven't asked him. And then the reporters asked Trump, well, if you haven't asked him, then how are you facilitating his release? Meaning he's violating the Supreme Court. Right. And so Trump answered that by saying, well, my attorneys haven't asked me to ask Bukele to release Abrego Garcia. So he's throwing his own attorneys under the bus here. He's basically saying, my lawyers have not told me I have to comply with the Supreme Court in the way that you're saying, which I think really underscores this basic idea, which is that he's being fundamentally deceived about the legality of his policies. Did you catch that detail? I mean, I thought it was extraordinary.
I mean, so at one point he says, nobody asked me to ask him that question, which was, are you going to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States? Which, I don't know, it says to me that, no one asked him to do it, so he didn't do it. I just genuinely don't think he's aware of how the Supreme Court ruled in this particular case. And if that's true, I mean, it's a little bit terrifying. But first of all, it's just Stephen Miller is running, immigration policy to a much larger degree than even we suspected before. But it also suggests that Trump is simply not aware of what is going on around him at the White House. He's not aware of what decisions the Supreme Court is making. And I think we know this about Trump. He's not the smartest, butter knife in the drawer. I think he's not going to go look at the Supreme Court ruling and see that it rules against him. He's going to take the word of his aides.
It looks to me like Stephen Miller is starting to sense that the Supreme Court is going to rule against them in the end in a final way on Rego Garcia. If that happens, as you say, they have been following some court orders. They've really dug in pretty hard behind this idea that Rego Garcia is never coming back, period. Right. If we bring Rego Garcia back, it will mean capitulating to the liberal media and to all the hated liberals who think the law should be enforced, right? So that can't happen. And so I think Stephen Miller is trying to steel Trump for the eventual need to defy the Supreme Court in one way or another. And the way he'll try to get there is by essentially telling him, everyone else is lying to you. The court has told you that it's really okay for you not to bring him back.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by Buick. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Buick Certified Service Fresh Start Tire Event. Visit Buick.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
So I think there's a lot to that argument. And I think it's quite possible that you're right about that. But I think, so here, let's go back a second. When they refused to abide by the Supreme Court ruling to facilitate Rego Garcia's return, I assume they were doing this because they think this is a winning issue for them on immigration. And if there's any place they're going to defy the courts, it's going to be on immigration and deportation because they think this plays in their favor. I mean, look, the polling suggests it does not actually. It suggests that this is actually really hurting Trump. But I think the view inside the White House is this is our issue. I mean, in fact, Miller says it in that Oval Office meeting with the El Salvadoran president. He says this is a 90-10 issue for us. He literally says those words. So I think he thinks this is a winner for them. So that was what I was assuming was happening. They were just going to, okay, we're going to abide by court orders, but not here because this is a good issue for us. I don't think that's what's happening. Now I think they actually don't. I think that Miller wants the president to take the position that on this issue, on deportation issues, the Supreme Court cannot tell him what to do. That he has, and he's made this argument. He said that his power to conduct foreign relations is sort of unimpeachable, and the Supreme Court cannot interfere, which is how Miller interprets the case, the decision, which is also incorrect, clearly incorrect. So I think you might be right that he is stealing him for a moment in which he's going to continue to violate a court order, continue to ignore the court, and do so for Trump's case, out of ignorance. Now, the thing is that what worries me about this is that the court, looking at this, could conclude, do we really want to? Right now, the White House is refusing to abide by this order, refusing to facilitate his return. Do we really want to go there again and say to the White House, again, you need to do this? Because if they don't, if the White House continues to say, no, we're not going to abide by this order, does it then weaken the credibility, fundamentally weaken the credibility of the Supreme Court? And does it lead to the court basically looking like a paper tiger? I think that's a real concern. If I'm on the court, forgetting the ideological makeup of the court, that's a legitimate concern, right? I mean, the court has no enforcement mechanism whatsoever on their orders. They have to. It basically relies on political norms. So what if, they think that Trump's not going to abide by this political norm? They might just rule in such a way that gives Trump some kind of political out on this issue. I think it's a real concern. And maybe that's what Miller's trying to accomplish here. But to my mind, there is no question that Stephen Miller, not Donald Trump, is driving the stubbornness of the White House in abiding by the Supreme Court order. It's not Trump doing this. This is Stephen Miller who's doing this.
Right. If I understand you correctly, and I think this makes a lot of sense, it's basically Stephen Miller bluffing the Supreme Court.
Yes,
by saying,
that's exactly right.
Right? By saying over and over, no, we won before the Supreme Court. He's essentially saying to the Supreme Court, we're going to roll over you if you don't give us a way to claim victory at the end of the day here. And this is why, by the way, I think two things are really important about this. One, the fact that his aides are lying to him about public opinion, and two, that the public opinion is about the abuses of power on immigration in particular. Because what we're learning from this polling is that Stephen Miller is wrong, that when they abuse their power on immigration and act lawlessly and send people to black sites and snatch people off the streets, the public reacts badly. They're not seeing it through just the prism of, oh, Trump is just dealing with illegals. Stephen Miller calculated that they would see it that way, but Americans aren't seeing it that way. They're seeing it in terms of the lawlessness. And so when the polls show that the lawlessness is unpopular, and when Trump's own people deceive him about what those polls are showing, they're essentially trying to get to the place where the lawlessness continues.
Yeah, and by the way, look at the polling aggregators on this. You can look at, there's a number of them. The numbers have really declined for Trump in the past week or so. I mean, look, I can't say this with certainty, but it sure seems as though the Rego Garcia story, oddly enough, and contrary to a lot of media sort of pundits' takes on this, has actually seemed to increase the decline in Trump's public approval. I think if you look at it from like sort of the mid-April to where it is now, it has dropped rather dramatically in that period of time. So I think this is, I think you're right. I think the lawlessness is one that even upsets people who are supportive of the president.
If the court does say in one form or other, you have to facilitate and effectuate Rego Garcia's return, there will come a point where Stephen Miller and those around him that are like-minded are going to want a confrontation with the court. Do you think that's going to happen, and what happens then?
You know, it's hard to say, right? I do want to just make one other point here, just as really quickly, that if you do read this interview, he does say at one point about Rego Garcia, bringing him back and retrying him wouldn't bother me. So I don't know that he'd be all that bothered by doing it. But I think what you're laying out, you know, unfortunately, I think is correct. That the White House, and I don't mean Trump, I mean people around Trump, I think have concluded that this is a place where they can potentially expand their power. So, you know, this is part of the problem we're dealing with here, is that, you know, ultimately when you have this situation where the governing trifecta, where Republicans control the White House and the Senate, the only real check on them are Republicans. And they've shown no inclination to be a check on Trump. So, you know, look, does there come a point when his numbers get worse and they say they have no choice? Maybe. But if I'm a Republican, you know, in the vast majority of congressional Republicans, I'm in a safe district, right? I'm in a district that my biggest risk is of losing a primary, not losing an election to a Democrat. And if I'm someone like Tom Tillis, who might be the most vulnerable Republican in the country, what's a bigger risk to me? Losing in 2026 to a Democrat or losing a primary to a MAGA Republican? And I can tell you, if Tom Tillis comes out against Trump, got a primary challenge, he'll almost certainly lose. And I think if you're Tillis or any other Republican in this situation, your calculation is, I would rather risk losing in 2026 to a Democrat than risk facing a primary that I will definitely lose. And I don't see any reason to believe that's going to change.
Well, when you put it that way, it sure looks like we're headed to a much darker place very, very soon. Michael Cohen, thanks so much for coming on with us, man. Great to talk to you.
Always a pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me.